You can go ahead and start the recording, Maddie. I call to, oh my God, I can't even speak today.
Call to order.
Order. The regular meeting of the Board of Selectmen for Tuesday, August 11th at 4 p.m. Please all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Item number 3 is first Selectwoman's update. So just wanted to real quickly update on a couple things. I mean, we got some great news about at the end of July. We've received back our money regarding the tax credit funds for the geothermal project at Neck River. So the town was given $2.2 million from the federal government, which is awesome. It was something that we had been planning to do because we installed clean energy into the new elementary school. And we ended up going through a very lengthy, extensive application process and did receive the funding. We got this all in before all that stuff went away. The incentives went away by the federal government. So hats off to the building committee as well as our finance staff to make sure that we got this through. We worked with a consultant on this. This follows, we had also received a year and a half ago, I think it was like $800,000 for the system that was installed here at town campus. So great win for us. So that money will go into the general fund and obviously be part of the conversation going forward in terms of what we would want to do with that fund, those funds. But that was great news to receive. Second thing is I had the opportunity today to attend a training on license plate readers. As the board's aware and the town is aware, we do have license plate readers installed in Madison. We put them in about 18 months ago. Really, that was initiated by a citizens group that had gone and requested that we install these. But there's been a lot of public discussion about this lately. And also new legislation was passed. And so this was a training on what the new legislation requires in terms of retention of data collection. And it was very educational. I went with the chief and Captain York. It was the Connecticut Chief of Police that held the training. Really interesting information, really good stuff to share with the community later, which I think the police department will be doing that about just all how Connecticut is actually very much on the leading edge of creating good best practices and policies around the use of this type of technology. So I thought that was very helpful because I know we've seen a lot going on in social media about how some of the data is being used in other places throughout the country. And so this could answer a lot of the public's questions, I think, about their concerns with this technology. And then the third thing I just want to let the public know is we will be talking at our August 24th meeting we'll get an update on the Surf Club Master Plan. The Beach and Rec Commission has been working with a consultant. They're going to be going out with a new survey again, even though we did a broad survey, but now we have a concept plan that was proposed. And there's just a lot of, I know, questions and concerns that was raised by the public. And so, and people felt like they didn't have to have adequate input in terms of the design of the concept plan. So they're coming up with a new kind of survey to put out to the public. And now you have something tangible to look at, which is easier. And I think we'll probably get more people responding because there's something actually to look at. And then they'll also be talking about, I know a lot of residents are very concerned about the seawall situation with the old seawall, the fencing, and what our plan is moving forward. And we've hired an independent engineering firm to do a report on recommendations about next steps and how to handle the fact that we have this seawall that is kind of destabilizing slowly because of the significant beach erosion we experienced this last year. So we'll be talking about that and kind of what some of the plans might be and recommendations by the staff and an engineering consultant about how to move forward with that. So that will be coming because I know I've gotten some emails and people asking about that. Coastal Resiliency Commission, I think, is meeting tonight. They're also going to be talking about that, although now it's called Flood Erosion and Control I can't remember their name. It's very long now. We combined that with another committee. But anyways, that committee is going to be discussing this as well because anything we do at the surf club in regards to seawalls, they've always had a role in giving advice and counsel on that, and they'll be working with any consultant that we do going forward on that. So just wanted to give that update. And that's it for my update for now. Open it up to board member comments, liaison reports. Anybody? I know it's kind of a quiet time, a lot of people on vacation, not a lot of meetings going on in town hall at this stage, so nobody? No? Okay. All right, I guess
You
with that,
mentioned Beachcombers. Beachcombers is
oh yeah,
Thursday night,
Beast
so probably
Course is
good
this
to mention,
Thursday.
right?
Yeah, yeah, which I know been putting out a lot, but that is an annual event that the chamber hosts downtown. We do close down Wall Street now, which is a lot of fun, and I know they're gonna have a lot of great vendors. And that starts at 4 o'clock this Thursday and lasts until the evening hours. So that's always a fun event. I know people love to attend that, and it gets people from all over the shoreline area to come and visit Madison and shop the businesses, and hopefully we'll have good weather.
The
Anything else?
wristband. You have to buy wristbands either in advance or down there, I
Yeah.
think. But
Yeah, you can check out the chamber website, and I think it was in the community update also. You can look at that and find out the details on that. So, and also today, obviously, is the primary. Still time to vote. Can't forget that. If you're a registered Democrat, you can still vote until 8 o'clock tonight in person at the Senior Center for District 1, which is the relocated location for voting this year as a temporary measure, and then at the Brown School for District 2. So, and that's available till 8 o'clock today. Okay, moving on, Maddie, who is just, my assistant is no longer an employee of the town. So Maddie is our communications manager, but she's going to be stepping in temporarily while we go through the interviewing process to replace Jeannie. And so that's who Madison Stout is. We will move on to citizens' comments. And if you have your hand raised, please state your name and address. And I don't see any hands raised at this point. There'll be an opportunity. Oh, we have a couple up now. Please state your name and address. Madison will promote you, and limit your comments to 2 minutes, please.
Susan Webble.
Okay,
so you
Susan?
just got to unmute yourself.
Susan, unmute yourself, okay?
Yep. Okay, there we go. It just took a minute. Where are we?
Yeah,
Oh,
there she is.
hey.
Hey,
Well, good. Nice to see everyone. Um, I think I have to say this for the record, Susan Weibel, 16 White Birch Road. First of all, thank you for including public comment. I have a question and a request. My question, and I'm here to kindly ask again for the Board of Selectmen and our select women to highly prioritize the public's role in Surf Club upgrade project. There are very few things that unite all the residents in this town, like our crown jewel of the Surf Club, and that's no matter the individual demographics, personal or political affiliations. Therefore, it's appropriate and reasonable that all major renovations, particularly ones that dramatically change the appearance and function of the beach areas, deserve ongoing and genuine support to proactively, thoroughly solicit the public's thoughts, ideas, feedback during all stages of the planning process. The upcoming survey is a really good start. I was happy to hear that. What are the plans to be sure there is wide distribution and response? Question one. And also, when will there be an advisory committee made up of town residents to immediately start organizing community input and coordinate their participation? This is a piece that's still lacking given the scope of this project and the importance to the public. I feel this project is too important to not prioritize a fully collaborative approach. And additionally, this project does deserve to be a standing item on the board's weekly agenda so that people can regularly be updated in real time on all happenings. And I'm here today because I wholeheartedly believe that full transparency is fundamental to a true democratic process. And if it's embraced here, it will result in an outcome that fully honors the collective wishes of all of those that live in Madison. I want to thank you for all your do. Our town would not be what it is without dedicated volunteerism, as we all know.
Great. Okay. Thank you very
Are
much
you
for your
raising your
comment.
hand to be the
Appreciate it.
chair of that committee, by the way?
I actually already have. I've talked to a couple people.
I'm putting it on record.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
a very positive perspective, the Ethics Commission is extremely boring, and we have nothing to do, and therefore, no, I do have a passion for volunteerism in the town, as many of you know, and I would be more than happy. I did talk to some people preliminarily about looking to maybe lead something up like this, focus groups, getting the communication out, like, again, what is the plan now that we have this survey, to make sure we get a full response, to make sure that, people, it's widely distributed and people are aware of it, just so that it can really be, a genuine tool, and moving forward with what's going to, demonstrate what a collaborative solution would be for this whole thing. Anyway,
Okay.
but yeah, I mean, you know how to reach me.
Great.
So
We
I talked to
do.
people a while
Okay.
ago, and I'm like, it's been cricket. So I wanted to make that comment again.
Okay.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you very much.
Good to see
Appreciate
you.
your comments.
Yeah, you too. Take care,
Yeah.
all. All right, bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you. So any other hands raised? There'll be an opportunity at the end of the meeting. So with that, I think we'll move on to item number 6. Before we go into the business of the meeting, I just like to make the motion to move up item number 12 to follow item number 7 on the agenda. I'd like to open up the agenda, I guess.
Moved.
Second.
Okay. And then all in favor of moving item 7 up to, or all in favor say aye. Okay. Moving
Aye.
item number 7,
Aye.
or excuse me, item number 12 to follow item number 7, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. I forgot, I'm not opening up the agenda. We're just moving things. So, all right. With that, then, moving on to the consent agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any further comments or questions?
No, other than
No.
thank you to the volunteers that are stepping up. It's always amazing to see.
Yeah, no, it's great. We continue to get some and some nice donations and everything. So
Yeah.
we're very fortunate with that too.
Another $10,000 from the Madison Newcomers Club. That's incredible. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great
And,
one.
2,000, almost $2,200 from the Madison Women's Club. Wow. Great stuff.
So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Moving on to item number 7. Discuss and take possible action to approve a collective bargaining agreement with the Teamsters Local Union 443 effective 7/1/25.
So moved.
Second.
Okay,
Love
so
to take possible action.
yeah.
What is
Well,
what
just
does
in
that mean?
case there was any,
Yeah.
I think it should just said take action. We've had several both executive sessions on this contract. This has been one that ended up having to go to arbitration. I have Deb Ferrante here. This is the final agreement that just kind of cements everything.
Yep.
Deb, I don't know if there's anything you want to add for a second. I know you're on, and this was distributed to the board.
Just need to promote her.
Yeah, I just did
There
it
she
now.
is.
Deb. Uh-oh. Okay.
There.
All
I
right.
see
Well,
her. I see her there. There she
okay,
is.
there she is. Yep.
Here she is.
Just gonna
There she
unmute
is.
yourself, Deb. I saw you do it for a sec. There she is. Nice. You did it.
I'm having technical difficulties.
Oh,
So
good.
I'm looking at one screen and talking to another one, but just one correction. The contract is effective July 1, 2024, not 25. So I just,
Okay.
Cool.
I'll amend my motion. That's right, because this is the one, since we went to arbitration, it is a
Yes.
backdated situation.
yes,
So I amend my motion for the contract effective July 1st, 2024.
correct. So yes, this has been a process, but we did go through a mediator and an arbitration, and we had the arbitration award come down effective April 1 or April of 2026. So this is just the final contract as a result of those negotiations going back and forth. It has been signed by the union, so they are accepting it. The next step is for the town to sign.
Nice. Great job,
So-
Deb.
Yeah, this was a long one, I will say, and I think the town fared well and the employees fared well. I think that was well managed. And a lot of times when you have to go through mediation and arbitration, everybody feels like they got something, right? So that's
Yeah,
always a good
agreed.
thing. Any other questions on this?
No, but let's do it officially. So I'm going to make a motion to approve it as amended by Peggy to
Yes.
the 2024 date.
And I will
I'll
second.
second that.
Okay, great. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye to the amended motion.
Aye.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. Thank you, Deb. Appreciate all the
Deb.
hard work, and I
Thank
know
you.
everybody's gonna be
Thank
happy
you
to
very
have
much.
that,
Yes, thank you, thank you.
finalized. Okay, item number 12, which we moved up, is discuss and take action to modify the procedures related to the delinquent taxpayers and issuance of building permits, certificates of occupancy. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Moved.
And a
I'll second.
I'll
Okay,
second it.
great. All right, great. And with that, I think we have Christina, our tax collector, as well as Stacy that can talk to this for a second. This was something that I know that they had been wanting to get done for quite a while, so. Okay, Christina, you want to just give a brief overview of what this is?
Yes, no problem. Thank you. Hello, everyone. See me
Hello.
a little bit. So we're not changing the resolution itself. We're changing just the procedures. And these procedures have not been updated since February of 2011. And what I'm simply doing, I believe you guys had a highlighted copy so you could see just easily what I'm changing or what I'm adding, I should say. So the current procedure just referenced the state statute for personal property. I'm adding verbiage to acknowledge the state statute for real estate, and I actually added the word personal property into the verbiage that is currently there for the personal property. So it's just an update to reflect what the state statutes currently say, make things more clear and up to date. Because the state statute does allow us to hold on permits for delinquent taxes for both real estate and personal property, but they are two different statutes. So that's all I did was update the states to add the state statutes, update to have a procedure for both real estate and personal property.
So just so I understand in practice, like I live in Madison, I'm late on my taxes for my house and I want to put a deck on my house.
Yep. So if you are late on your taxes, we could hold you up from being able to do that.
Okay, so you
delinquent
can't get a
taxes-
building permit issued, right? Unless you are current on your taxes.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, and I think this is kind of, like you said, it's the state statute and pretty common in most municipalities, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So definitely common practice, and it's what the state statutes allow. It's just that it has to get approved by resolution or ordinance. We have a resolution already, it just haven't been updated. And what our resolution says, it has to go through the Board of Selectmen for approval for the procedures to change.
Okay, any further questions on that? No? All right, I guess all in favor of modifying the procedures as according to the documents provided, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, good.
Thank
Motion
you, guys.
passes. Yep, so
Thank
now you
you.
can have your updated procedures in place.
Thank
I
you,
know
I
you've been hanging,
appreciate
wanting
it.
to get this done, and I kept bumping it because of
It's
just time.
it's
but
okay. It's
that was
okay.
it.
I appreciate
It was a quick one. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, moving on then to item number 8 is an update on flood mitigation project. It says Green Hill Place. It's really a broader project and potential next steps. So I'd like to elevate Sam DeBura, who's here, our head of public works, as well as Rob Russo, our town engineer, and Aaron Mannix. And so this kind of evolved out of this was originally like part of a project. There's a road at the end of Green Hill Road where there's significant amount of flooding due to a marsh that's there. And the town had put in place a repair on the other side of the marsh years ago. and it started to create flooding issues. It didn't create flooding issues, but you know what, I'm going to let Rob explain this better because it gets into a history of the project and Sam. Why don't you guys walk through this? Because this has been going on for a while. And now what we'd like to do basically is focus just on this specific neighborhood flooding problem rather than deal with the broader problem that involves the land trust and involves the state of Connecticut. We'd like to focus in on the neighborhood issue right now. So I'll turn it over to the staff to kind of get the background.
Oh, so I'll give you a brief, quick history. So as everybody knows, Green Hill Road came out to Route 1 before the highway went through. When the highway went through, it was cut there, and that's why we have the two different sections. In October 1969, the state was issued a perpetual easement on the property to install 200 feet of 42-inch corrugated metal pipe, a metal tide gate, and 175 feet of open ditch across the private land. So as far as I know, that is still in effect. In 2005, the pipe culvert began to erode and break apart. In October of 2009, the town applied for emergency authorization to Connecticut Deep to allow the installation of a temporary sheet pile wall with an opening across the eroded section of Green Hill Place. So when this pipe started to fail, it washed out a section of the road that the town owned. Pinder Construction in November of 2009, Pinder Construction completed the installation of the sheet pile. Connecticut Deep issued a notice of violation to the town. That was in March of 2010 for unauthorized placement of riprap around the outsides of the pipe, around the outsides of the sheet piling. In 2011, the emergency authorization from Deep expired. And then they issued another violation for our failure to meet the terms of conditions of the emergency authorization. So they wanted this pipe taken out. So the town hired this Moran Environmental Recovery LLC to remove the derelict pipe. And the property is now owned by the land trust. And we had to get permission from the land trust to do it. So when the company went in to do it, we got permission from the land trust. They started doing it, and they were just about finished when the land trust started raising a ruckus. Said to stop. They're causing more damage than than what they're doing, and they asked us to stop. Well, fortunately, the project was complete, so they stopped and pulled the contractors out of there. In March of 2024, we had a meeting on site with Connecticut Deep to discuss a pathway forward, because the existing tide gate there now is starting to fail. If you look at it at low tide, the bottom part of it is all rusted out. So at some point we're going to have to do something with that. So there's difference of opinions on how we left that meeting, but it was under my impression that the state was going to help the town apply for grants to install a new tide gate because they wanted to replenish the marsh. And whether or not we wanted to fix the road or not, that was up to us. So we've been going back and forth with Deep, since then. In April of 24, we had another meeting with them. Then in April of 25, we submitted our certificate of permission to fix the sheet piling with the riprap. The COP was issued, and then the work was done in October of 25, and we just received from Deep in January that the compliance letter and the violation has been lifted. So whether or not this, and I apologize, my camera's not working for some reason, but I know this does have some impact at the end of Green Hill Road, the flooding, and sometimes that floods up to 18 inches. There's 7 houses down there that are affected by this. They're complaining basically because it's increased repairs on their vehicles. They have to drive through, brackish water that causes their brakes to fail early. Everything's getting rusted out. So going back and forth with the state, they've kind of seems like they want to wash their hands of it. So to get ahead of this, we'd like to hire a consultant. We have a price from SLR. It's just under $38,000 for them to analyze the whole situation and come up with a solution. I think that we're going to have to raise the end of Green Hill Road, but we'll wait for for their engineering firm to come back and tell us what we need to do. The once we get this in place, options. There is grants out there for flood mitigation, that we could apply for. But I would ask, and some of these grants are pretty extensive. So once we get a path, we should actually have this firm apply for the grant as well. I know that's not included in the price that we have for the analysis of the area, but that's about it. It's kind of keep it as short as possible. I have a long meeting. Is there any questions?
Well, I think the reason I have it as just a discussion topic is this is not formally a project in CIP, but it is mentioned as a problem area in our coastal resiliency plan. I would like to use money from this coastal resiliency fund to pay for this study. We don't have a money set aside to do this. We could delay this and kick it into the CIP process, but I feel like the flooding has become it's been recurring a lot more frequently than it did, which we've seen with a lot of flood issues in town. And that I just feel like it would put us in a better situation if we could get moving on this. And then we also could go after maybe some of these grants that pop up. There's one at the end of this year, and then I think, or at least tee us up for next year. I would hate to have to wait a whole year to then get the money for the, study and then have to apply a year. So, because we kind of were waiting for the state, we thought they were going to take the lead on this and they really didn't. And so I know the neighborhood is very frustrated, and I feel like, why don't we just get this moving? We have money in the Coastal Resiliency Fund that we could tap for this. And so if the board is amenable to that, then I would bring it back at the next meeting to vote on using those funds, and then it has to go to Board of Finance. So that's where I wanted you to feel, as I do in this, that we should maybe put this a little ahead in terms of spending planning dollars versus just kicking it to the CIP process.
Contacted directly by some of the residents, and to me, this is, I think Sam just mentioned it was a 2009 problem, maybe even earlier, that we're going back to. To me, this is just kind of a no-brainer. We got to go get this fixed. I mean, this is something that's gone on for too long, and this is an opportunity to just correct something, and the state seems to be dragging their feet big time on it. So let's go figure this out.
So, any other questions? So we would basically, come back with using, what does the studies cost again, Sam?
38 grand, he said.
Was it
Just
38?
under
Yeah.
It's like 37,900. It's like just under $38,000.
Yeah, and I think we have over $800,000 in the Coastal Resiliency Fund, so I feel this is adequate. I don't think we have to wait for the CIP process. I mean, Stacy can talk about that, but I would rather just get moving on this, and use what I think is appropriate funds for the study. And it doesn't commit us to a project, because it could be, the project is another whole conversation about where this lies in other priorities and, what is the appropriate fix for this. And I also think we need to talk to the state to see if they're going to be doing more in terms of their end of this.
So I
Aaron,
think
did
the
you want to
state,
add something?
as far as the tide gate, I feel that the state's, it's on them. They had the perpetual easement for the maintenance of it, and I don't know why they washed their hands of it, but we probably should have pushed back years ago on them. But with the sea level rise and all this other stuff, I think that's contributing to the end of Green Hill Road flooding. So it's kind of a complex situation, right? And I know there's not an easy fix, and there's going to be a lengthy permitting process when we go to do the fix, especially because it's all tidal marsh around there and wetlands and stuff like that. So So it is going to be a lengthy process, and we really need to get it moving.
I'm supportive of using the funding. This problem probably does date back, as Sam mentioned, probably to 1958 when the Connecticut Turnpike was built. I would suggest that we involve the land trust very early in this process and make sure they are consulted by the consultant about any fixes that might involve land trust holdings.
I
Good
was
suggestion.
going to mention that as well, Al, on the Green Hill Place portion. I mean, Green Hill Road, some of the elevations on Green Hill Road are at elevation 3, which with that sheet piling that was installed to sort of maintain what the flow from the culvert that was there and the pipe that was in that channel. There were flooding impacts on Green Hill Road, I think, that predate the sheet pile. And I just, from the information and the history that I had gathered on that, the failure of that culvert at Green Hill Place was not the result of storm event Ernesto. It was a result of the state's failure to maintain that pipe within their easement. And the tidal flow in and out of that with that degrading pipe is what sucked the material out and further degraded that area. And it's very visible through all of the aerial photos, the damage that has occurred in that area. So I think there is a relationship between Green Hill Road and Green Hill Place, but as part of this exploration, I think it's important to understand the flood impacts that area where that washout, where the pipe was removed, is having on that tidal wetland that is just east of Bruce Beebe's properties, and the flood impacts that has on Old Post Road as well, and those properties that are getting flooded from behind. And I recall, Sam, from our meetings with Deep, there's an environmental aspect as well for restoration of that tidal wetland behind their properties, because that increased water flow now is damaging, not allowing that sediment to accrete there in the tidal wetlands. And so that habitat and flood control is being eliminated. I also, because Green Hill Place is still a town road, and with that culvert washed out, the board's going to have some policy decisions to make as far as what to do with that road. There are property owners there, like Al said, the land trust is in a butter here, and Bruce Beebe as well, who own properties on the other side of that road. So the board should look into, those property owners may have rights to access their properties now, and what should be the long-term plan for, is it eliminating that crossing of Green Hill, discontinuing the road, those kinds of things too. So I just wanted to state that we should include the neighbors and the property owners on the Green Hill Place side, as well as those to the north in Green Hill Road.
So I think those are conversations like reviewing the scope of work, Aaron, that we can talk with the engineering firm, because we'll be coming back with a more formal proposal. So that number 38 isn't 100% nailed down yet, but I guess I would just like to get the boards to proceed in this way, so that we'll come back with the final, and then you would vote on using the funding from the Coastal Resiliency Fund.
Yeah.
So
There may be funding opportunities from a wetland marsh restoration aspect. So it might be helpful to have that kind of come back in the scope from or in the findings from that, because that might open up additional funding sources instead of just flood control. We might be able to piggyback the two together.
Yeah.
I know that's what the state's focus was. That's what really brought them to the table, was the restoration of the marsh.
Right.
But ours is a different focus. Let the state restore the marsh. I don't know why we should be, putting the money out for it, but
Well, I think we could have that conversation outline, in terms of what the scope of work for this, and maybe that's a conversation, because maybe some of the analysis that Aaron is talking about would help us in terms of grant applications for the roadway issue. So I think that if I'm hearing from the board, you're good with us, we'll nail this down, then we'll come back and we're gonna request the funding for the study at least be handled through the fund. Okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. And so I appreciate that. And I think the neighbors will appreciate it and we get this thing moving, and then out of that will likely come a project that would be put into CIP or, for grant applications and everything else. So this is just the study. That's what we're committing to right now.
Yep.
Okay, or not committing today, but when we vote on the funding. So, all right. Okay, everybody good with that?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you on that. So item number 9 is update from the Water Pollution Control Authority on the proposed Town of Madison wastewater facilities plan. We have I know we got Tom Hanson, who's the chair of the WPCA. We have our health director, Trent here. And I think we have somebody from the consultant from Weston and Sampson. So we've talked about this. We've talked about this a lot over the last 3 years. This is a major undertaking. And the committee has now completed their work essentially. And they want to kind of hand off the report to the board. The next step is then the board implementing some components of the plan, and we would have to decide how we're going to implement, how it's going to get paid for, all that different stuff. But I think it would be good to have kind of this handoff now to us. And I think there's a presentation, right, Trent? If you just want to tell me how this is working today. Is there a presentation, I guess, that Weston Sampson's doing, or?
Yeah, it should be
Okay.
John Ruvo. He should be on. I'm looking at the list of names here.
Okay.
I don't see him.
Okay. Bear with me. Hmm.
Okay. So while you're getting that sorted out, so we've already done a public hearing on this, and this half of this was paid for by the state of Connecticut through the Clean Water Funds, I think it is, for the study. So they're kind of putting pressure on us to have to kind of shepherd this forward. It's quite an extensive study, and then it also comes out with a number of recommendations. The primary being setting up these wastewater management districts where they're kind of troubled spots in town. Tom, I don't know if you want to just spend a second highlighting, or actually Trent, I know you wrote that memo, but like just highlighting what the big picture,
Sure. Well,
outcomes of this
what we're
is.
looking for we've done the report, and what we want to do is submit that report to the state for their formal review. That's the way to get the funding in place for anything that we do in the future. They have Madison on what they call the priority list for funding, and they're expecting this report to kind of move that along. The recommendation, as you know, is we don't have a recommendation for sewering or anything extensive like that. As Trent put it in his memo, this is really a management program. We want to establish wastewater management districts in some of the real difficult areas where it's very difficult to put in complying septic systems. And it's troublesome for the homeowners, and it's troublesome for the whole town in respect to the environmental impact along the beaches and the shorelines and the wetlands. So our report, as you know, reviewed the alternatives such as sewering and really selected this management program instead. And we want the state to, or what we expect the state to do is to participate in that program with us. But a lot of ground still has to be covered, and we're not going to be able to cover any of these until we do get the report into the state. setting up the districts, writing an ordinance, establishing the criteria for building new systems or improving systems. And all of these steps will probably go through another formal public hearing process and budget hearing to try to get the money in place to do that. And with the state having received our facilities plan, they will be in a position to participate in the funding. That's really where we are now. We have nothing on the table, structural or administrative right now that the town has to do. We just want to get the plan in front of them, see what they say. If they feel it's an appropriate plan, they will participate. If they feel it's not, they're not getting a return on the buck for it, they'll have us reconsider the options. But nothing is being proposed right now. There's no outlay of funds. There's no establishment of a new ordinance or anything. We just continue under the Department of Public Health guidelines, which Trent, of course, manages very well from the Department of Public Health.
I wasn't able to get
An
Matt or
endorsement.
John.
Yeah. I'm sorry, what, Trent?
I wasn't able to get Matt or John on, but
Okay.
you summarized it pretty well, Tom.
I mean, this is really just an endorsement from the board that we're allowed to put forth the draft facilities plan to the state for their review.
Are we
we've
still, Tom,
seen,
allowed to make edits or changes, post the submission?
Oh, yeah, and I'm sure that will happen as comments come down from the state, because it's not just DEEP, they run it through other agencies as well. Public health, they have wildlife management. There's a lot of people that go into the review process. And yeah, it's our plan. It's not the state's plan. It's our plan. And it's up for us to make changes if we want to make changes, but we will do so in coordination with the state.
yeah, and I think here we're accepting what the committee is saying, and then it's very different than I think adopting and implementing, which is actions we would be taking later.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of conversation that has to come out of this, an ordinance that we would have to set up, funding structures, timelines. Those are all things that I think the board would have to go through and really agree on how we would want to see this implemented.
That's exactly right.
And really, it hasn't changed much since it was last October, right? It was almost a
Yes.
year ago when it was
Yeah, it's the
presented to
same
the
plan.
board.
Yeah.
Yeah,
October,
and then they had the public hearing. I remember attending that at the senior center. So, I feel like we're at a point, we've had multiple opportunities to review it. I think I'm comfortable just accepting it, right? And saying, let's take it now, and let the state take a shot at it. And then we'll have to figure out an adoption later of what we're actually going to do, what that implementation plan is going to look like.
Yeah, this
agree
is
with
kind of
that.
like a 20-year look down. We say, where do we want to be in 10, 15, 20 years? The implementation steps really still have to be worked out.
Right.
Mhm.
So we have to,
Yeah.
you guys would have to technically vote yes to go in that direction.
Yeah.
That's
Item number 10.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and even based on the anticipated timeline here in the memo, it looks like we wouldn't even be looking at potential implementation of the plan enforcement wise until like fall of 2029. So lots of
lot of things.
conversation still to go on with this, but yeah, it makes sense at this point to let the state have their crack at it.
Yeah.
Great.
so if,
Should I make a motion here?
Yeah, go ahead. Item number 10. If
Item number 10, I'll make a motion to approve the Town of Madison wastewater
no, to
facility
accept,
plan.
discuss and take action to accept the town of Madison.
I will
wastewater
accept
facility
the
plans.
Town of Madison wastewater facility plan.
So moved. Can I get a second?
Second.
All right. Okay. Well, with that, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. All right, good. So now this is
I'm
moving
coming,
on
Tom.
to the next phase. Yeah.
Yeah, Tom.
Our consultant will,
Tom
Now-
just stepped down, I think.
yeah, whoop, I'm out of here. Our consultant will actually do the submission because they know the process to go through. There's just a little application form that has to be sent in. And they will do that now. And they will indicate that the board approved it at such and such a selectmen's meeting, and we'll get a copy of the minutes, something like that, just to make it formal. So they know they can open a discussion with the town on the process.
Great.
Okay, good. Well, moving on, because I know this
Thank you
is
very
going to be a
much.
big,
see you,
Yeah,
Tom.
thank you, Tom. Thank you, Trent.
yeah, thank you to getting it to this point. And from there, we will have to do a lot of heavy lifting, I know, for the next phase. So thank you for that. All right, good. Okay. So moving on to item number 11 is an update on additional due diligence conducted for the Academy School property. As the board knows and the public knows, the board made a decision, I think, in March that the preferred concept that people were very excited about was exploring the hotel. But there was also some red flags about the concerns about septic, the feasibility of building, or not building, but developing the site into a high water use because of the soils and everything down there. And so our staff, we have our health director, Trent, here, and then Aaron Mannix, our town planner, felt before we actually go any further with the whole hotel idea, we really need to drill down and figure out, can that site actually support such a use? And so we decided to engage a consultant. It took a little longer than I'd hoped, but we did get there. And I want to welcome Brian Curtis. He submitted a report to us about a week or two ago, after looking and doing kind of a desktop analysis of the whole site. So not just focus on what the community center had been proposed, but looking at the whole site. So I thought it'd be helpful, maybe, Brian, if you could just introduce yourself and then just talk about the exercise that you went to. We have a copy of your report, but I think it would be helpful to just kind of highlight, some of the takeaways from your analysis for us.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, Brian Curtis with Nathan Jacobson Associates. We did this preliminary analysis of the Academy School town property, and looked at the potential for on-site sewage disposal. And Trent and Aaron had forwarded us quite a bit of information from previous studies. So basically, we looked at the available information from those prior studies, primarily the soil testing on the site, groundwater monitoring. There was a previous design for it was proposed as a community center at the time, and Cole did a engineering design of a septic system for that use. So basically, I think the main things to focus on for the town to consider is the regulatory agency jurisdiction over septic systems. Currently, the health department or recently expanded jurisdiction up to 10,000 gallons a day. Very recent. Previously, it was originally 5,000 gallons a day. Beyond that, went to deep. Then it went to 7,500 gallons a day. Then it went over that, went to deep. Currently, the jurisdiction of the health department is 10,000 gallons a day. It's getting quite large under the health code jurisdiction. And there's a large differentiation in design criteria between the health code systems and deep systems. Although the health department, now that they're going up to 10,000 gallons a day, they're starting to look at other aspects of design that deep considers, and primarily nitrogen impacts on the groundwater quality. So as of State Health Department memo that came out on August 3rd, any applications currently received are going to be looking at nitrogen impacts for system designs in the range of 5,000 or 7,500 gallons a day and higher. You have to also look at nitrogen impacts on groundwater quality. The prior design for the community center was looking at a system design under the health code of about 4,200 gallons a day. And they laid a system out in the backfield area along the westerly border of the backfield. And they created a system for that flow capacity. And it also required mounding of the topography in order to have proper groundwater separation distance. when we looked at the soil test data and groundwater data, it looked like the system, you could expand it somewhat to the north and south, larger than what they proposed, and it would get up in the range of around 6,000 gallons a day. Again, that's under the health code design criteria. Um, and the main limitation on septic system capacity from the health code standpoint is based on the depth to groundwater, the percolation rate, and the slope of the water table. The health code dictates how spread out a system has to be for a certain design flow. So it looks like it's limited to something on the range of 6,000 gallons a day if you stick with that westerly border of the site that abuts the church property. Um, the prior design, I think they focused and settled on that because that met the design needs of the community center. I didn't see that they explored the easterly part of that backfield, maybe because the ball fields are there and not wanting to create a mound and disrupt the ball field. So maybe that's why the focus was on the westerly part of the backfield. It's significant to note that this site has a long history, and I'm sure you know more about the history of the site than I do, but the center of that field area encountered organic soil deposits, peat deposits, a higher water table. So probably decades ago, there could have been maybe filling of the site in the center. It could have been a wetland or watercourse that was filled decades ago. But the primary thing to think about is that both the health department and DEEP, they look at the capacity of original soils on the site, not fill materials. So whatever you design a system for, it's based on the non-filled areas, especially if it's a filled wetland or organic soils, peat deposits. So perhaps that's why the center part of the site was also not investigated, because apparently it was filled sometime many years in the past. If you're looking at uses of the site, it would also have to accommodate, you have the other buildings on the site towards Boston Post Road. You would have to account for flows for those buildings as well as any potential use of the Academy building. And if you're looking at potential hotel use, I mean, the design criteria for a hotel is 150 gallons per day per bedroom. Or if you had a restaurant in the hotel, you're at 30 to 45 gallons per day per seat per day. So you would have to account for those types of flow allocations to decide. I don't know what size hotel is being contemplated, whether it's a small boutique hotel of like 20 rooms or 30 rooms, or if you're considering a large hotel. That would have an effect on whose jurisdiction you're under, either the health department or DEEP. And I will say that based on this nitrogen criteria that's now going to be included in the health code, if you get into these larger flows like 10,000 gallons a day, you're going to have an issue with nitrogen, and it would likely involve some kind of a treatment plant for nitrogen removal, similar to other, like we designed the Muse condo complex years ago. That has a treatment plant for nitrogen removal. And if you get into something like that, it's quite expensive in terms of the capital costs and also operation and maintenance by a licensed operator. You're looking at an operating cost of over probably $100,000 a year just for the licensed operator, chemicals, sludge disposal, electricity, and so forth. So the not only the capital costs, but that ongoing annual O&M cost, it's significant to consider in your business plan for any potential uses of the Academy building for, say, a hotel or something like that, if it involves a treatment plant. Mm-hmm. So I kind of raced through that, but just kind of give you a summary of jurisdiction, site capacity. If you're getting into something over 7,500 gallons a day, it's going to probably involve evaluating nitrogen impacts even under the health code. They haven't come out with the detailed formula for that yet, but it looks like they're leaning towards the same model that DEEP uses for nitrogen analysis. So that's kind of in a state of flux right now. The health department final regs probably won't be done for, I don't know, Trent, maybe a year from now. They have to develop the technical standards and all that. So it's a ways off yet, but requirement for nitrogen analysis is currently in place as of August of this year.
So, Brian, thank you for that kind of overview of the analysis. And I guess a question I have is, if you had to put in, and I would assuming that a hotel use would be greater than it would get to that threshold, right? And you'd have to go into over 10,000, I would think, a day, right? You'd have to get into the state regulated DEP system. What does that mean in terms of like leaching fields and like how, because I think the big question mark here is um, the what would have to be done to the site in order to accommodate a system of that size, right? Because right now we've always focused just on the building. And then the community center had this plan. It didn't really disrupt the rest of the site, right? Except for moving the playground, I think was required when we were going to put in the new septic system. So if you were to put in a much higher usage type development into that building and add an extension, which is what the proposal is right now from the hotel people, what does that look like? Like, how does a leaching field work with the DEP system? Like, what do you do? How much land are you taking up and having developed to accommodate that?
Okay, yeah, well, a couple things. If it's a health code system, they have a formula for how spread out the system has to be. It's a formula, and it's pretty straightforward. And the bottom of the system has to be at least 2 feet above the seasonal high groundwater table to address the site hydraulic capacity. If you get into the DEP analysis, it's basically doing a more extensive soil testing, permeability testing, groundwater monitoring for the slope of the water table. You would have to demonstrate that the soils on the site could handle that amount of water, which that's a question that you may or may not be able to handle a large flow, because the natural soils on the site have to be able to handle that flow. And the deep systems, you would calculate, well, you're adding, say, over 10,000 gallons a day, the water table is going to mound up higher. The bottom of your system would have to be 2 or 3 feet above that mound. So it's probably a greater mounding result and a greater impact on the site topography, because you're going to have to mound the leach field up probably higher than you would for the health code system. So it's a matter of calculating how many gallons a day. It's not like there's unlimited capacity. You can only get the soils on the site can only handle so many gallons a day before the water would break out at the ground surface. So that would be all have to be calculated and tested to determine what that capacity is. And again, I don't know how many gallons, I don't know how many rooms they're talking about for. You could get a health code system for a hotel. It's just a matter of how many rooms you're talking about. If you had a hotel,
I think it's if I recall, and I don't have what the proposal that we have at least currently, I think it was like in the 60 plus range for hotel rooms.
62.
Yeah, 62 rooms, and then 4 residences that were considered like owned residences in the building. But then it also did include a restaurant, possibly a spa facility.
Okay.
So
bar.
Yeah, there was a 62 room cafe, rooftop bar, spa, event space. So I calculated about 10,500 before the restaurant, bar, and event space, Brian.
So it's getting up there pretty large, yeah. And the soils on the site, when they tested the westerly area, the water table's at like 4.5 to 5 feet below grade, and soil modeling indicating a seasonal high water table was shallower than that, like 2 to 4 feet. Yeah. So it's not like you have a water table at 15 feet below grade and all sand and gravel, where you would have a lot of hydraulic capacity. So it's that would be a question. Do you even have capacity for the soils on the site to handle that kind of flow? Mm-hmm. And what the resultant mounded water table would be, and then your system would have to be mounded up above that. So that would require a lot of detailed, soil testing, site modeling, and calculating the mounting of the water table. And you probably would most certainly have to get in a treatment plant for treatment of nitrogen if you're up in that above 10,000 gallons a day for the site. For example, the Muse has a treatment plant. We did the Madison Beach Hotel that has a treatment plant again for nitrogen, and the hotel was done as a repair, so that there was a lot more flexibility there. But the treatment for nitrogen is a big impact dollar wise because of that annual operating and maintenance costs by a licensed operator. That's required. That would be a DEP system, anything involving a treatment plant. And it's a substantial annual cost aside from the capital construction cost, that the business would have to support.
Any sense, Brian, on notional costs there, just to sort of put it out there? I'm curious what we're in for here.
I'll say that again about cost.
Notional cost. Do you have any sense of what it might be? Even if it's a range, I'm curious. I have no sense of, is it $10,000 a year? Is it $100,000 a year?
Oh, it'd be over $100,000 a year operating maintenance cost. That's what these other facilities are. That's what the cost of operating these other systems. It's in that range above $100,000.
And that's before, and then obviously the capital cost to build it, right?
Correct.
More significant.
Yeah.
Which obviously, if this was a private development, that would be borne by the developer in terms of whatever they were using. But I get a question I have though is this water table issue. Is there an answer that you can solve any problem, with money? Like, can you bring you said you can't bring fill in, right? So can you build up enough above the water table to meet your needs? Is that just a problem? You just bring in a bunch of soil and dump it there?
Well, you can bring it in to raise the height of the system above the water table. You cannot bring fill in to have the fill actually transmit and treat the sewage laterally. They used to allow that in certain instances where you could just place fill. The septic system was built in the fill and it breaks out at the toe of the fill. I mean, on this site, you wouldn't want that anyways, because you don't have a place to discharge it to, but that's not permitted anymore. The site would have a set capacity, a limited capacity gallons per day based on the natural soils on the site. And that would be the limit. You can't exceed that, regardless of how much fill you bring in. They don't want the water table breaking out at the ground surface. It would have to stay below the ground surface. So you don't have a tremendous amount to work with here. The water table is not extremely deep here.
So what would it be to get the answers to that though? Because my understanding is we have not done that kind of testing for the whole site. It's been very specific to the project, right? They did it for the community's project and that had a certain daily usage
right.
target. What does that look like to get an idea for the whole site?
Well, you would have to do some additional soil testing, install groundwater monitoring wells, monitor them through the spring high water table period to establish the high water table elevation, and then soil testing to determine the soil characteristics. And then the soil testing, you would do a modeling of how much water the site could handle based on the soil results and the modeling calculations. So all that work would have to be done to arrive at a site capacity.
And what's the length of time something like that takes?
Well, you would have to monitor put in the monitoring wells, monitor that through like December through early May period. And then you would also have to do all the design calculations and soil testing during that period.
And just in terms of I'm just trying to, because once again, like to do any kind of leaching field, you're going to have to go into those fields, it sounds like, no matter what, right?
Yeah, like the current proposal, and that was for the size of that system was for like 4,000 gallons a day. So you can picture you'd see how big that system is. It would be, correspondingly larger.
Yeah. Okay.
There are some advantages with the treatment plant. The leach field could be smaller in terms of application rate, but you still have to have the site hydraulic capacity. But the leach field would be, larger than what was previously designed because the flow is larger. Yeah.
And just going, because other conversations, I mean, this obviously, I don't know if you're a resident or know the history, but this building has obviously been debated for a long time. And some of the other proposals that we received were housing. And people talked about commercial development. To be honest, the proposal received for the hotel was the first time that idea had come up, right? So that's where the other uses, is there an issue with housing there? I mean, the board decided not to pursue that, but I just want to understand, like, would we be having this same issue if housing had been a proposal for that building development?
It would depend on flow. Again, if you're health code jurisdiction versus deep jurisdiction, it just gets, because of the larger design flow, it requires the more elaborate, testing and analysis for even 10,000 gallons a day. That's a large system. I mean, it used to be 5,000 gallons a day under the health code. Now it's 10,000 gallons a day. So I think the health department will be updating their criteria even for these larger systems because it's warranted to look at it in more detail for the large flows.
Okay. Yeah, I just trying to think back to when the town, prior to the community center, had thought about housing. I don't think there was any testing that was done to see if the site could actually support that, right? So, and because there was some large developments that had been proposed back, this is back in like 2017. But I don't think there was ever there was no broad testing for the whole site. And then the community center was a very targeted use. And so the focus was just developing a septic system for that use. And now we have a facilities plan, which Trent refers to a little bit in our memo, that's proposing uses for Memorial Town Hall and some of the other buildings on there that are municipal. But from my understanding, those uses are pretty low, right? So that's not going to drive this. It's really going to be whatever would go into the academy building.
Yeah, and it could be other uses. I mean, for residential use, you have so many gallons per day per bedroom. Again, it's 150 per bedroom, and there's different sizing criteria for a leach field system for residential use or restaurant use or hotel use. And the health code, certain uses like a restaurant, it's a high strength waste, so you have a larger leach field required compared to residential use. So there's flexibility on what type of uses you could have, but mainly it's the design flow and whose jurisdiction you fall under. It's not unlimited site capacity. It'll have a finite site capacity, and as you can see, even the 4,000 gallon a day system under the health code, it uses a substantial portion of that back field area. And you might get up to 6,000 gallons a day if you extend it a little bit north and south, but it's taking up like a third of that whole field area for that magnitude of flow.
I do just want to mention, Brian, you said that, just as a correction, or just adding to it, it's been great what you provided, is anything over the 5,000 gallon per day would trigger a nitrogen assessment because it will be a change in use for the site. So
okay,
it's 5,000 with the new regs. It's not the 7,500. So now any change in use above the 5 triggers nitrogen assessment, but it still keeps it DPH. It still keeps it public health.
Okay, yeah, because I know that if you were near a wetland or if you're in the coastal area over 5,000, it required it. So the change in use also requires it. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's getting, that's getting down to the even this expanded system under the minimum leaching system spread, you would be into a nitrogen analysis then over 5,000 gallons a day.
And what does that, though, I guess, entail, a nitrogen analysis when you say that? Does that mean it might require some sort of additional treatment, even though not a plant, but
they haven't really clarified that yet.
Okay.
Yeah, it's up in the that's the $1 million question.
Yeah.
Well, basically with deep, you look at the sewage flow, it has a certain concentration of nitrogen, and then you look at how much rainfall infiltration is on the property to dilute that down to the drinking water standard. And if you're getting around, 800 gallons per acre, you're at the limit of the drinking water standard, roughly. So, that's why I said if you get up to 10,000 gallons a day, you're definitely going to have a problem with nitrogen you have to address. It's based on natural rainfall infiltration or stormwater infiltration to dilute the nitrogen. Otherwise, you have to put in a treatment plant to get the nitrogen out.
I think our professionals are being properly cautious in their remarks so far. I'm trying to understand whether how skeptical you are that a project with a flow rate of a hotel, a restaurant, and a spa could be accommodated on this site. Is there, based on what you know today, is there some reason to be skeptical?
Yeah, I think it's questionable what if you could get over 10,000 gallons a day on the site. I don't know what the whole easterly part of the site along Academy Avenue. I don't know they didn't test over there. I don't know what the soils are like over there, if they're native or if they're filled material. Some of the soils were variable. You had some sand and gravel. You had some clay deposits based on the test pit description so far. I don't know what it's like along Academy Avenue side, and it's pretty flat terrain also. So the water table is pretty flat, which is not a big plus in terms of site hydraulic capacity. Yeah, I think you'd have to be cautious thinking that you could get anything that large on the site.
Can I follow up on that question? You had noted in your summary and just talking today, next steps would be, additional soil testing on that east side of the property and the groundwater monitoring through the whole wet season. Can you kind of give us an idea of what that process costs, like ballpark? And if you think that's two things. If that's a worthwhile, like at this point, next step for the board to consider, and if so, what does that physically look like on the property for this? Because I'm envisioning that those fields would have to go offline for, they're all going to be dug up for test pits, and we're going to have standpipes throughout the field, which could limit, at least use of those fields during that short-term testing.
I think you could do just some simple like test pit excavations and put standpipes into test pits, and then you could backfill them flush with grade or put boxes in, so you don't have to have them sticking up above grade, and yet survey elevations and locations on them, and then you can monitor the depth to groundwater in these observation wells, throughout the spring period. But to put them all in, it wouldn't take more than a week to do that with the backhoe and test pits and standpipes, and then monitor them through the spring. So it shouldn't be too disruptive to the use of the property, and mainly it's the field time to put them in. You're probably talking less than a week's worth of work for that, and then just get survey locations and elevations on them so you have an accurate readings of the elevation of the water table. At least that would tell you what the water table elevations are and what you have to work with from that standpoint.
Okay. So the monitoring process of that and the soil testing, as far as understanding how much water the soils can hold, that's that whole assessment with just the installation of the pipes and the test pits. Is that like a $50,000 range? Like, what do you?
Yeah. If you do the testing and soil analysis and the modeling for the water table hydraulic capacity, that would be a much more expensive than just putting in the monitor standpipes. You would have to do a lot of soil testing and pump testing of the wells, and then the modeling. So you're looking at something probably in excess of $50,000 for that level of effort.
That would give a definitive answer as far as the hydraulic capacity of the site to know this is the maximum daily.
Yes, that would be the goal.
Come out versus just the standpipes and groundwater monitoring level.
That would be the goal of that level of effort, is to determine how many gallons a day you could get on the site, to meet either the health department or the DEP regulations or their design criteria.
I mean, it sounds like that's something we should have been done like 15 years ago, but then I guess, you know, it is what it is, because I think no matter what we do with this building, or if we demo it, we're gonna have open space that we might want to build something in the future there. We need to know this for anything, right? Because we have several other municipal buildings on the site as well that we have to make some decisions about. And we know right now the current uses and what's being proposed is probably not an issue, but I would think we would want to at least have this information for future, you know, decisions. No
Yeah, I
matter
think
what.
that the testing that was done so far was sufficient for the proposed use. It was done for purposes of meeting the health code design criteria for the community center and the other uses on the property. So, that was sufficient for that proposed use. But if you're getting into these large uses beyond that, then it gets to a different level of effort. Like we looked at in Westbrook, we looked at the area behind the old town hall, the ball fields there. But we did, quite a bit of money spent just with the soil boring rig and putting in monitor wells and pump tests on the wells, soil testing and modeling. It was quite expensive to do that. It's just a lot more work involved, and it was more costly than just putting in the standpipes and monitoring the water table.
I think the other question to consider is, if we want to know what this absolute maximum capacity is, right? And we stand to have to put in a treatment facility that's going to run $100,000 a year in operational costs. Is that something that we even want to take on, even as it pertains to the hotel, right? If they take on the cost of building it, they take on the cost of maintaining it. What happens if the business fails? How hard is it going to be to sell that, to get somebody else to take that on? And if they don't, what responsibility does that leave the town with? And is that something that we even want to pursue? I know that's even, a little bit outside of this particular conversation, but I think it bears mentioning.
Yeah, I think you're right. If before you do anything, like say it's a hotel operator, are they going to spend $1 million to $2 million for a treatment plant and then 100,000 plus a year for the operator? Does that work with their business plan based on their anticipated revenues or not? You could ask that question right up front. And I think if you get into commercial uses, those could be shut down if there's a failure. But if it's residential use, that's a lot more difficult. Usually, then the onus falls on the town or you have your WPCA community system agreements to cover those eventualities. But those business questions about construction costs and operating costs, those could be asked right up front to see if like say a hotel or restaurant use could support that, because it's not a small amount of money. It's a pretty substantial amount of money.
I'm reminded that we need to keep the other 3 town buildings in mind as well. So we're not just talking about the specific academy building. We've got the other 3 buildings that we need to accommodate as well. So if I understand correctly, that's additive in addition to whatever a hotel or other use for the academy building is.
Yes. Yep.
I mean, I think our goal.
Oh, I'm sorry, Peggy, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say our goal, as we've talked about, would be to address the whole site, right, with any future, because also the systems that are serving those buildings are very old, and eventually we're going to have to do something there anyways to address that. So this should be a site-based solution, whatever the town decides to do.
And physically looking at those fields behind Academy, Brian, a treatment plant is an above grade structure, usually enclosed, right? A building. Generally, like how much square footage does that take up? And then if we have a mounded system, I'm just trying to kind of give that visual of what the fields would potentially turn into, as far as topography and, is there room for a treatment plant on the property?
Yeah, like your you do need an above grade structure for the mechanical components. You know, you have chemical feed and blowers and things like that. For example, your the high school. The high school
Yeah.
has a treatment plant, and you can see the size of that. It's not a large building, but it's a building, and you can see how large the leach field is for the high school uh, system. So it be something on the order of that size. Or the Muse has the treatment the mechanical units are in a couple of garage bays, but it's an above ground structure for those housing those elements. So that plus the size of the leach field system would have to be able to fit that on the site.
But
Now,
my
as
understanding though is you're elevating it, right, too? So this would be, you raise the grade up wherever the leaching field was a foot or two, or
Yeah, well,
depending on what you
yeah,
need.
even the proposed system for the 4,000 gallons a day was, I think, mounding what, Trent, a couple 3 feet a
Yeah,
mound above grade. So
3 feet.
it would
Yeah.
be at least that much of a mound.
from
Regardless, you're reconfiguring those fields no matter what. I mean, you're either losing the fields or you're reconfiguring them. And again, like think about the design of the hotel in its current form. We asked from an RFI standpoint only to look at a part of the property, not the full aspect of that property. So, I mean, that's something we got to think about.
and then from the facilities standpoint, do we know what the usage is gallons wise for each of the current buildings, Memorial Town Hall, Powder House, all that stuff?
Yeah, it's a little over 1,300 gallons.
Okay. So, even if, say, the town decided to go the direction of what the facilities committee proposed, which was a downsized academy building with amphitheater on the back, and then, other usages for those buildings, we would be able to, it sounds like, accommodate the water usage in the smaller scenario without doing a whole treatment facility.
That's correct. It's just keeping in mind that it's going to still be that western part of the field that will be
Yeah.
elevated.
Okay.
Which we're gonna have to do for any of our buildings down there, right? Eventually we build the system, so.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure I've got
Yeah,
all the puzzle pieces together in my brain.
yeah, it's a lot to,
Trent, though, even the western part of that field is sort of already to some extent elevated, right? It would extend the elevation, I would think, right? Because there's that weird hill on the back
Yeah.
side.
Yeah,
Oh, right.
right. And then you get into some unnative soil. There's some fill material as you get closer to the middle. And again, we're talking as it proposed for the community center, both the leaching trenches were separated 50 feet apart on edge. So it's still an east to west spread as well as north to south of that ball field. Yeah.
so, I mean, it's a lot to absorb. I'm glad well, I mean, I think that the
Unintended.
positive thing, the EOI process brought out this great idea that we were very excited about, right? But I don't think we'd ever looked at this piece of, can you do it in the site, right? And it's sounding like it's going to be very challenging to accomplish that in the site. And it's also going to involve a lot more than the original
Rich.
parcel that we had put
Yeah.
into the expression of interest. So, so
Fairly
I think
disruptive to that community for sure. So we have to be mindful of that.
yeah, but that doesn't mean that there's not another way to make it happen. It's just
No.
that I think that, we now have a lot more information about how to approach this. And I think that's where the board, in my view, I think number one, we should still move forward with the groundwater analysis because we're going to need that no matter what, right? That's just good information. It's town property, and we should understand what our limitations are going forward for anything. And that includes a hotel, commercial, residential, which I know we took a residential off, or just demo. So we know what in 10 years from now can be done to a vacant parcel there. So, and then secondly, I think we need to think about what our next steps would be on this now. And I don't have an answer for that. I think this is something that I'd like to brainstorm a little bit more with staff and let us absorb what we've received today. And come back and talk about, how we would move forward in one way or another on this. Because I don't know if I have the answer to that right now. Do you, anybody here have suggestions? So, and obviously we're not the full board. This is going to be a bigger conversation. And unfortunately, Bruce was not able to join us today for this. So, so my thinking is maybe coming back with a proposal to at least get this groundwater analysis going, because it's going to take a while, with more details, cost, impact on the fields. Aaron, what's your thought? What?
One question about those next steps while Brian is here. If the board or whatever use say, kind of hovers around that 6,000 gallons per day that you had kind of estimated, Brian, that could be handled with just adding on to the previously designed system, is there still value in doing that modeling and groundwater, that maximum capacity, or is that not necessary? Do you like with that added nitrogen analysis, and we don't know what's going to be required to do that analysis just yet? Should we be going ahead and doing that with the pump tests on the wells and things like that, or just start with the simpler test pits and monitoring wells?
Well, you probably have enough information already for at least going up to 5,000 gallons a day, because you were close to that already with the current design, and that was all approved. And it was based on, what it was decided where the water table was. The system was elevated a couple feet above that, and it was, mounted to accommodate that. So you probably have enough information already for going up to probably 5,000 gallons a day, because then it wouldn't kick in the nitrogen analysis. That probably sufficient information there already for that, without doing anything much further.
But I think that the what we're trying to understand is
It's
what
potential.
potential.
The
Not
maximum,
like, we're kind of sitting here. We have one opportunity that clearly is not going to be able to it's going to have to go to a higher capacity usage, right? You might be able to design down the hotel, and I'm sure we'll hear from the hotel people about this to a certain point, but I think we need to know what the maximum, you're going to want to maximize the capacity of the site, right?
Keep in mind, it's not just the hotel, right?
Right,
It's you're adding those other buildings. So if you got 1,300 already as a baseline,
yeah,
plus whatever the hotel needs, you're already over the 5,000, clearly.
Yeah, and like Trent said, the health department hasn't come out with their methodology yet for the nitrogen analysis. I think it sounds like they might defer to or use the same analysis that Deep uses, but they haven't said that yet. So that you probably need to find out what they're going to be using for their model for nitrogen impact analysis, because that would have a bearing on whether you need treatment or not.
So I think why don't we at least, I think the staff, we come up with a kind of proposal about some of the testing stuff, and then I think we all kind of walk away and think about next steps a little bit, and come back and have a further discussion on this. And maybe it's a special meeting, to talk through what are the different paths here, and go from there. But I think today was more meant as an intake meeting. And then we'll come back with some more targeted specifics.
Me.
Is that,
Yep.
is that good? Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Brian. Appreciate it.
Okay,
Really
you're
appreciate
welcome.
that, Brian.
Trent,
Very
yeah.
educational.
Yeah, great info.
Yeah. Very, very, very helpful with all that. So so with that, then I think the next item is actually move 12. So I think if we just move on now to citizens' comments. I know there's some people here are very eager to speak. So as Maddie brings you up, please name and address and try to limit your comments to 2 minutes. Okay. So we'll go online and she'll just go in order of, we have a hand raised.
Ashley? Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Ashley Rook-Grenier. I live on Summer Hill Road. I'm also the president of Stode, the company that submitted the proposal for the hotel development. I just want to make a few comments because I think there's an important distinction between identifying the constraints and actually determining the feasibility of the development on this site. So we haven't heard from the town, the board, since our presentation publicly back in January, and we haven't had the opportunity to really participate in any of this feasibility work or even look at the study that's occurred since then, and we really want to change that. Our intention from the beginning was always to work with the town as a partner to figure out what can responsibly and economically work at the academy site. And I think, as the engineer stated several times, it really depends on what the development is on this site. And I think that's the right spirit to carry forward. The program that we presented in January was never intended to be immutable. Our job as the developer is to understand what are the constraints of the site and then modify the program to respond to them. And if actual testing tells us that there's less capacity than we previously anticipated, then the burden is on us to say, okay, maybe we need to bring in a more sophisticated treatment system or change the programming. And that's our responsibility and our financial risk as a developer to bear that cost. And I think that's important for the town to keep in mind as you do pursue private development on the site. I also think a lot of the issues that were raised tonight are issues that we raised ourselves back in January. We always knew that this would involve deep. It was contemplated in both our development timeline as well as our budget. We put millions of dollars aside because we assumed there would be a need for advanced treatment on this site. We also assumed that there would be hundreds of thousands of dollars in ongoing operating costs. So to say that those weren't necessarily contemplated in the business model isn't true because we went into this site understanding that this was never going to be straightforward, and we knew that the constraints were going to be difficult to overcome. But ultimately, the site requires actual testing, which it sounds like everybody is taking away from this conversation. And the desktop research that's been done to date is valuable for identifying the questions and the constraints and where to go look further, but it doesn't tell us what the site can support. And whether skepticism is appropriate or being conservative is appropriate is maybe to be debated because you really need to actually go do the testing in order to answer any of the hypothetical questions that have been raised tonight. And I would also say, I think it's actually irresponsible for the town to attempt to determine the maximum feasibility of the development in isolation from the developer, Stode in this case. If we've heard multiple times, it really depends on what the programming is, what the ultimate development is, and the party responsible for designing, modifying, financing, and then assuming the risk of that development really needs to be at the table in order to have those conversations and work in a way that's both economically responsible and also results in something that's ultimately feasible to build. Otherwise, the town's effectively evaluating a hypothetical program rather than engaging in something that is ultimately feasible. Um, I also think we're standing here and we've said multiple times to multiple board members that as a developer, we're willing to bear the cost and the risk of this testing because we would need to do it as the developer regardless. And so we think the responsible next step is to really partner with the town to gather that data and move the project forward in a way that can result in actual outcome. We are prepared to undertake that next level of testing as part of the development due diligence and bear that cost. Obviously, the other municipal buildings, need to be factored in, but that's a conversation that we think is worth having together. Because this is just basic development due diligence, and we want to be at the table with the town as a partner to understand what are the real constraints and then test the economics and design around them. And so, our request is a simple one. We want to engage with the town. We've said that before. We want to be a partner. We would like to sit at the table together and establish what testing is necessary and undertake that work so that we can come up with something that either is feasible or we all, we do the work and we say, hey, you know what, we gave it a really good try and this site actually can't support this. So ultimately, we remain very interested in the project and we're willing to invest our own resources to answer those questions and be a meaningful partner to the town and come up with a viable path forward for the academy school. And so we're not asking the town to assume that our proposal works today, and we're not asking the town to come up with, in a black box, what our proposal needs to be. We want the opportunity to do that work together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your comment. Next hand up.
Andrew.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Thank you. Andrew Wood, 37 Seaview Avenue. I'm also the chair of the Economic Development Commission. Firstly, I'd like to remind you that the Economic Development Commission has made it clear that it supports the redevelopment of the Academy as a hotel. Not only will it provide economic drivers for our town centre, but it will also anchor the connection of our downtown to the historic green, which is one of the goals of the strategic plan. And it will also provide services such as restaurants, rooftop bars, spas, that attracted many residents to write to you in support of the proposal. And in addition, of course, it will create permanent employment. But I'd like to remind you that in the words of the developer that at the January public meetings, the hotel will generate real estate tax revenue of between $600,000 and $1.2 million a year. At the town's current long-term bond interest rate, this revenue could finance between $17 million and $34 million of additional capital expenditure by the town. In other words, that would certainly be sufficient to cover the surf club redevelopment and probably some of the recommendations from the facility committee also. As Peggy said, it's disappointing that after 20 years of considerations of proposals for the redevelopment of Academy, we are only now getting to grips with the septic requirements, which would have to be addressed whatever we do, including the do nothing plan, because we want to reuse things like the Memorial Town Hall. So it's sad that we are where we are. Further, it's apparent that since the meeting in March the 16th, which after all is 5 months ago, not a lot of progress has been made, except we've now finally got a septic discussion opening. But one thing that has not occurred, and this is certainly what Ashley was referring to, is that I'm not aware of any communication with the developer of any form or sort. Yet in their presentation, they talked about the septic requirements of the site. We've never asked them. We've talked at this meeting about we don't know what, we don't know where. Why haven't we asked them? Who should have been talking to them? So in summary, the EDC has requested that the Board of Selectmen, firstly, rapidly develop a process and a timeline to pursue this redevelopment. It is now 8 months since the public hearings in January. We secondly asked them to appoint a project manager to be responsible for coordinating the responses across the town departments to move the project forward. And thirdly, we asked them to find a way to communicate with the developer and recognize that the developer is a partner in the redevelopment, admitting that clear communication and collaborative decision-making are essential to the redevelopment's success, particularly one as complicated as this is likely to be. And finally, that you recognize that the hotel redevelopment offers meaningful long-term income potential that could finance other capital projects in a way that other redevelopment opportunities and options cannot. Overriding everything is time is of the essence, and we're wasting it at the moment. With a project of this nature, delay creates economic risk, both with the developer and the town. So please, can we make some progress?
Okay, thank you for your comment, Andrew. We have another hand raised. And request again to just limit the comments to 2 minutes, please.
Lindsay?
Hi, my name is Lindsay Johnson, 70 Twilight Drive. I wanted to also say that I too serve on the EDC with Andrew. But as a constituent of Madison, I am concerned also by the fact that we are spending town dollars on consulting studies without even communicating with the hotel developers. It seems like they would be the ones that would have the specifics that were needed. And as Ashley had mentioned, they're willing to work with us. And so with the fact that they have the allocated funds, that would make the most sense to partner with them.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Another hand raised. Please state your name and address.
Moni?
Mark Mamula, 60 Randy Drive here in Madison. Andrew and the developer group and Lindsay as well have articulated many of the issues I think that all of us in town are thinking about. The town has, as best I can tell, has spoken for what their interests in what the property should be. And there's clear frustration. I think you'd have to admit that for the years that have gone into trying to find a solution for the Academy School project. That's absolutely clear. And there have been years of kicking this process down the road. So I guess my question, and I'd love to hear an answer to this, the others have made comments. We've heard that there is money allocated and on the table by the developer. What would any reason be that the town should not engage and take advantage of clearly information that will come from that property assessment by the developer, no out-of-pocket expense to the town, and working with the developer, which the developer and Andrew and many of us have already heard. Give us some explanation as citizens why this doesn't sound like a feasible interaction.
Okay, thank you for your comment. And I think just to make a few general comments as we close here is that this is a public process which does not operate like private and it does in the private development world. We were always advising council, getting advice from our council about the appropriate next steps and who we should communicate with. Given where we are, we launched an expression of interest process. And this, one of the proposals was a response to that. So we're trying to follow everything appropriately that we should. I will say that at our next meeting, when we do have this and we talk about moving forward, I'll try to give a better explanation as to where we are and what the right next steps are going forward. So all reasonable questions, all fair comments by the public. Not always easy for me to answer directly right now. So I think we'll have at our next meeting a fuller discussion of process and restrictions and limitations about what we can and cannot do in this process. So I hope that helps a little bit, but we will have a better discussion, I think, at our next meeting. We're not prepared to have that today. Any other comments the board wants to make? I know it's public comment, but there's no hands raised. Obviously a big discussion tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, with that, then I will get a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Moved.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 All right, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, bye-bye.
All right. Have a good one.